Hey there guys, today we are going to do a lab called the Ionic Formulas Lab, and what we're going to do in this lab is we are going to take some copper 2 chloride and we are going to react it with some sodium phosphate, and the directions are going to tell us to react them in some different ratios, some different proportions, different amounts of each, and see which ratio gives us the most product. They're going to produce copper 2 phosphate, which will be a solid. It'll settle down to the bottom of our test tube, and we're going to see which ratio produces the most. And the idea there is that the one that produces the most is the ratio of the ions in that copper 2 phosphate. And then we can write the formula for copper 2 phosphate. And then, of course, we know how to write the formula by looking up the charges for the different ions. So we'll see if we get the right formula for copper 2 phosphate. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pre-lab questions there, and then we will do the lab. Okay, really the only pre-lab question is it wants us to figure out the ratios of the amounts of the copper 2 chloride and sodium phosphate that we're going to add to our test tubes. Okay, so the first one, it says in the first test tube, we are going to put 3 drops of copper 2 chloride, and we're going to put 27 drops of sodium phosphate. And then the ratio there would be, of course, 1 to 9. Both those numbers are divisible by 3, so it would be 1 to 9. In test tube number 2, we'll put 6 drops of one and 24 drops of the other. Both those numbers are divisible by 6, so that ratio would be 1 to 4. Test tube number 3, 12 drops of one, 18 of the other. Both those numbers are divisible by 6, so we would get 2 to 3. Test tube number 4, 15 drops of each. Of course, that ratio would be 1 to 1. And then test tube number 5, 18 and 12. Both those are divisible by 6, so we get 3 to 2. Test tube number 6, both those numbers, there's 24 drops of one, 6 of the other. Both numbers are divisible by 6, so that would be 4 to 1. And then 27 drops of one, 3 drops of the other. That ratio would be 9 to 1 in test tube number 7. So let's go ahead, let's go into the lab and let us do our experiment. All right, so here I have my 7 test tubes, test tube 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I have my copper 2 chloride, and I have my sodium phosphate. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the corresponding number of drops into each one of our test tubes, and we're going to give it a few minutes for the solid precipitate to settle to the bottom, and then we'll see which one produced the most. So let's take a look at this here. So now we've got 30 drops total in each one. Hopefully they all look about level with the amount of stuff in them. We've got some copper 2 chloride and some sodium phosphate in each one, and we can see that they've reacted. Now let's give them a few minutes to settle so that the solid material can settle to the bottom. So let's give it a few minutes and then we'll come back. All right, it's been about 5 minutes, so let's go back to our test tubes here and see what we can see. Hopefully you can see that in some of these, in most of them, like particularly in the first ones, you can see that the precipitate, the solid product has settled, the blue stuff has settled down to the bottom, and there's quite a bit of clear liquid above it, right? You can also see that in the last couple. You can see it settled down to the bottom, and there's quite a bit of clear liquid at the top. In these middle, maybe the middle three here, it kind of looks like there's a lot more precipitate. So somewhere around those middle three is the ratio that we're looking for. And if you were to ask me, I would say test tube number 5 looks like it's probably got the most of that solid stuff in there. So let's call test tube number 5 the winner there. And let's go talk about what that means. All right, let's take a look at the questions at the end of the lab and talk about what it means that test tube number 5 had the most stuff in it. Okay. The first question just wants you to shade in the test tubes to show how much stuff was in them. You probably can't do that on the digital document, but you can draw yourself a picture. The second question said which test tube produced the most precipitate, and for that one we said test tube number 5 looked like it had. So for number 2, let's say test tube number 5 had the most. Third question there, it says what was the ratio of copper 2 chloride to sodium phosphate for that test tube? Okay, so test tube number 5 had a ratio of 3 to 2. Three to 2 was the ratio for that particular test tube. Okay, question number 4. It says the precipitate produced in the test tubes was copper 2 phosphate, which is phosphate being PO4 3 negative. Using the ratio you answered in question 2, write a formula for copper 2 phosphate. Okay, so if that ratio is going to be 3 to 2, that means it's going to be 3 parts copper, 2 parts phosphate, which would be 3 parts copper, 2 parts phosphate. Question number 5. It says write the formula for copper 2 phosphate by balancing the charges the way that we had learned to do so in class. Okay, so let's talk about copper and phosphate here. Copper is copper 2, it says, is 2 plus. You can't see that. Is 2 plus, and phosphate is 3 minus. So if we go about trying to balance these, we got a 3 and we got a 2, we got a 3, they don't balance, right? So let's add another one of these because that's less charge there. Cu2 plus. Okay, they still don't balance. I have 4 positives and I have 3 negatives. So let's add another phosphate here. And they still don't balance. I have 4 positives and I have 6 negatives. So now let's add another copper here. And now they balance. We have 2, 4, 6 positives and we have 3, 6 negatives. So we can write the formula. We have 3 coppers, Cu3, and we have 2 phosphates, PO4, 2. Well, look at that. It's the same as that we got through the experiment. Isn't that neat? All right, well, there was the Ionic Formulas Lab. We used an experimental method to figure out the formula for copper 2 phosphate. So, copper 2 phosphate, interesting, is a transition metal, and it's also got a polyatomic ion. So that was an interesting formula for us to figure out. All right, until next time, take it easy.